Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We will just wait a few moments for people to join us. A number of you have been with us now since the 25th of March, and you know the drill. I'll just wait a couple of seconds and we'll have our larger group. We have a large level of interest today. And today I have the honour of presenting Barbara Nugent. She's from Transilient. She's from Effective Executive Coaching, and she's going to talk to us about building a resilient mindset. And this is the first of a two-part approach. And her next webinar will focus on confidence and building one's self-confidence. This has arisen. It was a great suggestion from our board, but in tandem with that, a large number of makers have said to me that their confidence has been really impaired over the last 12 to 13 weeks. So you've all been working on product development, you've been working on other aspects of your business. So now is the day to take time out. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Barbara. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emer. So good afternoon, everybody, and it's really nice to be here and to talk to you today about how to build a resilient mindset. So as Emer said, my name is Barbara Nugent and I'm an executive coach, and in my previous life I was an accountant, and I headed up finance organizations in multinationals over a number of years. And a few years back I decided I'd had enough of the finance world, and I would set up a business of my own, teaching and mentoring people in business, in leadership, running teams and so on, I suppose based on my knowledge and my retraining as an executive coach and a leadership coach. And so one of the areas I'm very passionate about is emotional intelligence. So using our emotions as a source of information and intelligence to tell us things about ourselves, but also using our emotions in a positive way to get the outcomes that we need and want in life. And one of the elements of emotional intelligence is resilience, and it has become something that's very important to us in the current situation that we've all found ourselves in. And so I wanted to talk to you this afternoon about being resilient and how can you be resilient, and is it something you just have or you haven't, and how can you build practices into your life every day to maybe help you with that idea of building resilience. So the first thing I wanted to really talk about is what is resilience, because we use the word a lot. As I said, we're using it a lot at the moment. We're talking about resilient economies and resilient cities and resilient communities and resilient businesses. And in order to be any of those things, of course, we need to be resilient individuals and resilient human beings. So the idea of resilience has come from the verb resil, and resil means when you stretch something as far as it can go and you let it go, that it springs back to its former shape. So when I talk to people about, what does resilience mean to you, they nearly always say to me, oh, it's about bouncing back. And I suppose it is in a way, but I think resilience is an awful lot more than that. So one of the ideas, I suppose, that I feel around this is that when we have adversity in our lives, whatever form or shape it might take, and however big or small it might be, we are never the same afterwards. We are changed in some way. So all of us here at this moment, whenever we resume our lives in whatever shape that will take, and we still don't really know that, we will have all changed. Something will have changed for every single one of us. For some of us, it'll be something huge and life-changing. And for some, it might be something kind of small, but it will still be changed. So I don't really feel that we can go back to how we were. So what I feel is that resilience is bouncing forward. So coming out of a situation of adversity, having the resources and the capacity to deal with that situation in a positive way insofar as you can. And that's really about learning. So what did I learn about myself and about others in this situation? And when I'm faced with a situation like this or another difficult situation, how will I have better capacity and resources to cope with that? So resilience is a capacity to deal with adversity in life. So some of you might be very, very familiar with this stress curve. So when we are stressed, of course, resilience is very much under pressure. So I think you can probably see my cursor here. So when we are under very little stress, it's not necessarily a good thing. So we always see that stress is bad, but stress is not bad. Stress is what gets us out of bed in the morning. So it's that rush of adrenaline and cortisol that literally lifts our feet out of the bed and onto the floor. And so it's very, very important for us to have a certain amount of stress in our lives. And if we have too little stress, we're actually really bored. So a little bit of stress is important for us to have so that we're engaged with life or with work or whatever it is that we're doing at that particular moment in time. Up here in the yellow part, that's where you're at optimum stress. So you're not too bored, but you're definitely not exhausted or tired either. So you're really engaged in this area here, and you could be in full flow where you're really engaged in an activity, something you love, something you enjoy, with a little bit of stretch in it, maybe a little bit of pressure or a deadline. And this is the place where you really work quite well. Of course, when you tip over here, over the top here into the orange zone, that's when you have too much stress. So you're not getting that time to restore yourself. You're not getting that time to recharge the batteries, let's say, and you start to get tired. And then, of course, we start down this slope here where we start to become very anxious. Maybe we become overwhelmed. Maybe there's too much information or there's too much to do. And as you progress down the red area there, then you can see that, sometimes people just burn out. And I've certainly seen that in my corporate life, and I've probably been there a couple of times without ever really knowing it. That stage where you're just really, really tired and you can't cope with anything. So you might wonder, well, what things do resilient people have? What kind of traits do they have? So this study here literally looked at the skills or the characteristics that the top most resilient people had in the survey, the middle and the bottom. And these were the qualities that they came up with. So having focus, so often you find that if we're not focused, if we're all over the place, if our mind is in 10 different places at the same time, we become very stressed. And then we don't have the capacity to deal with things as they come up. Having a sense of purpose, having fulfillment in life, being optimistic, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. Vitality is energy. So how much energy do you have to actually deal with things? This idea of presence, which is really around your values and your beliefs. What do you believe? How do you show up in life? And how do you manage that sense of solidness within yourself? Decisiveness. So if you have a decision to make and you're procrastinating, again, this adds to loss of resilience. When you have values, when you're very clear on them, and again, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, then it's easier to make decisions because you know what's important. And so when you know what's important, it's easier for you to make sure that you are living in alignment to what you believe is right. Being assertive, so being able to communicate. This idea, we talked about it just there earlier, the bounceability factor, the bounce forward factor. And the one here on the bottom, which is really, really important, is sleep. So having enough sleep. And I'll touch in on each of those again in a few minutes. So the things that stress people in life are these things. So too many open folders. So if you're on your computer and you open a tab and another tab and another tab and you've got all these tabs open, it makes it very difficult to know what you're actually doing, or maybe you're dipping in and out of tabs. And so this idea of having too many folders open leads us to become overwhelmed. And we are multitasking, we're trying to do 10 different things at once and probably ending up not doing very many things right or in depth. Lack of time, and I put in this word perceived lack of time. So do you really have a lack of time, or are we busy fools? Are we doing things that are easy to do, but we really don't need to be doing it, and they're chewing up our time, and then we don't have time to do the important things? Or is it that we feel we have too many things to do, so too many folders open, and we don't have enough time to do all the things we want to do? The third one there is lack of clarity. And that comes back to that idea of your values, knowing what's important and not getting caught up in the shiny toy syndrome of all the different things and all the different options, and not being able then to choose one thing or another because you just have too many choices. Lack of knowledge. So when we don't feel very competent, then we don't feel very confident. And so that causes us a lot of stress. So if you're going into a situation that you haven't been in before, or a situation that you feel you don't know what you're doing or talking about, then you'll probably feel quite stressed. Change, of course, has always been a source of stress, so it will depend on what kind of stress, or what kind of change, but changing a job is very stressful. Moving house is one of the most stressful things we can do. Moving country, any kind of change like that can generate a huge amount of stress in our lives. Worrying about things that haven't happened yet. So future events appearing real, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but another source of worry. So if you're a worrier, this is what you do. And again, that causes a lot of stress. Maybe it costs you your night's sleep, for example, and then you don't have the ability to deal with things the following day when they come up. Lack of control or perceived lack of control. And again, that's that word perceived. So do you really have no control over the situation, or are there some things you do have control over? And of course, I put down there on the bottoms of my new slide deck is the situation that we're in now has caused a huge amount of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of fear, the uncertainty of it, the changes in our lives. All of those things have caused a lot of stress for all of us in various different ways. So I'm just going to take a look at some of those in a little bit more detail. I'll just change my slide there. So one of the things I suppose to note is that when resilience starts to fail, it then fails progressively. In other words, you might start up here at the top of the spiral, feeling a bit confused, maybe you're a bit overloaded, you got too much work on, you're trying to juggle too many things. But at the moment, what we see are, we're trying to work from our kitchen table and the children are at home from school, and you're trying to run your business and you're trying to, manage dinner, or you're trying to, work, or maybe you're on a call like me and somebody's coming in behind you, and all of that kind of confusion is kind of high level stuff. And sometimes you can, take a deep breath and manage it. And then other times it might actually start to become a little bit more, engaged in your psyche, and you start to become quite agitated about it. And then what happens is that kind of spirals down into this kind of sense of being disengaged. So when you're not able to focus on things, your attention is broken, and you start to worry about things, or maybe you just get bored with it and you just think, oh, I'm done with this situation. I'm fed up with it. I'm just gonna zone out. And then what often happens to people is they start to withdraw, and they pull away from it. So I know, for example, the first couple of weeks of COVID, we had a ton of these Zoom calls and there was webinars coming out of our ears and we were going to everything. And at a point in time, I kind of thought, I can't do this. I wouldn't go to these many meetings in real life. So I can't go to all these Zoom meetings and webinars and things that are all amazing, but they're all on at the same time. And of course, all of that settled down over a number of weeks. But at that point, I just withdrew and just thought, okay, I need to pick and choose what am I going to take part in, because otherwise you become exhausted. But if you do withdraw, what happens then is people can become isolated and they can become very stuck in their own heads and what's happening with them. And then what that can lead to is this sense of tiredness and feeling vulnerable. Sorry, I've just lost my slide there. Feeling vulnerable and feeling tired and not really caring about what's going on in the world. That leads then to being very distressed, not being able to sleep properly, perhaps, and that sense of maybe getting sick, maybe feeling ill, and so on, and then down into maybe some level of depression, sadness, illness, and loss of interest in life. So what starts off as a state of overload and agitation and being terribly busy and maybe doing mindless things can, if it progresses and continues to progress, end up in a series of maybe depression or illness and so on. So it's good to be aware of that, and it's good to make sure that you don't actually go down this spiral, and we'll have a look at how you can make sure that that doesn't happen. So some of the things we talked about here, I suppose taking action or looking at what actual things can I do? What are the steps that I can take? What are the elements of resilience that I can do something with? And so if you just take a look at our butterfly here, who hopefully will emerge from COVID-19 and look very beautiful and strong and resilient, there are a number of elements that are mapped out here. So the ones in green are the ones to do with your physical resilience. So it's very much based on the idea of putting your own oxygen mask on first. So we cannot help anybody else unless we help ourselves first, unless we're strong, unless we're coming from a good place. It's really, really difficult to support somebody in their lack of resilience if you are not in a good place yourself. The items marked in yellow there, they're to do with your mental resilience. So what goes on in your head and how can you manage that better? The red ones are your emotional resilience. So again, looking at the things that we can work on and we can address to help us to have the capacity to cope better. And then the ones in blue there are our spiritual resilience. And when I speak about spiritual, I'm not speaking about religion, although of course that can form part of your spiritual resilience, but other things as well. And we looked at some of those things that the most resilient people had. And what you saw mentioned there were things like beliefs and values. But there's some other ones in there as well that are equally important and that can be actioned in all of our lives. So if I move on to just looking at physical resilience, the four elements there are sleep, nutrition, exercise, and environment. So I think the most important pillar of health here is sleep. And it's something that I've been working on myself for the past year, and I've worked really hard to try and improve it. So when you don't sleep well, it's very difficult to cope with anything. So if we're talking about building resilient businesses, for example, you know, if you're exhausted and you're mentally and emotionally and physically exhausted, then you really don't have the capacity to have a resilient self or a resilient business. So there's a lot of science behind sleep now, and we understand how it restores us, how it restores our brain, how it improves our memory, how it keeps our blood pressure under control, how it keeps our weight under control, and lots more. So sleep, you know, the studies on sleep over the last probably 10 years or so have really shown us that this is a pillar of health, and it is very, very difficult to cope with adversity of any kind, big or small, if you are exhausted. Moving on to that then is nutrition. And again, the science behind that shows us that some things, some foods affect our mood. And then if our mood is not good, again, it's hard then to pick ourselves up if we're in a poor mood or a low mood. How do we then deal with something that's difficult, that's affecting us in some way? It's very difficult to do that. So becoming aware of how we feed ourselves, if we think of our brains as an expensive car, we wouldn't put rubbish fuel into it. We would put the premium fuel into it. And very much the same here with nutrition. We need to fuel our brains and our bodies with the best that we can. And for all of us, that's different because we are all obviously different people. But some people will have, you know, food intolerances and food allergies. And some people find just some things just don't agree with them. So being more aware of that and fueling ourselves to be resilient is quite important. The third one there is exercise, and exercise is a physical resilience pillar because it impacts our brain science. So exercise helps to release endorphins such as dopamine and serotonin, and they are the things that make us feel good. So if you go out for a lovely walk or you go for a run and you come back and you feel great, That's the endorphins absolutely rushing around inside us, making us feel really, really good. And it only lasts for a short while, but it is a really quick fix if you are feeling a little bit low. But the interesting thing about exercise is if you build an exercise habit, those endorphins become much more prevalent in your brain and in your blood and all of that. And so what happens is your brain actually builds new neural pathways to open up all of those great good feelings, so that you actually have much more access to it than you would have done if you don't exercise regularly. And regularly is the issue here. For a lot of us, I know for myself anyway, I might be great for a week and then something will happen and I'll just drop it all again. So trying to get out for your walk every day, even if it's only a small one, doesn't matter what level you exercise at. What matters is that you do it consistently. And that will help you to certainly have more resources and to feel more resourced. Your environment is the fourth one there, and our environment is literally from the people around us to where we sit. So if you are trying to work at the kitchen table and it is covered in the breakfast dishes and the dinner dishes, as mine can be sometimes, it's not very conducive to being very resourceful or feeling very creative or feeling very, very managerial or businesslike and so on. And so trying to make sure that we have the environments around us to help us to do whatever it is we want to do, to be more productive. So the same would go for sleep. Having a nice restful bedroom, for example, will help you to sleep better and so on. So the first thing, I suppose, is making sure that you put on your own oxygen mask first, and that you are able then to resource yourself on a physical level before you can help other people with their resilience building. So one of the things, or one of the ideas around this, is to have a place of refuge. So somewhere that you can go, and it doesn't have to be a place. It can be a belief, it can be a poem or a piece of literature or a piece of art or something that energizes you, that helps you to feel connected, to feel grounded, where you can re-emerge feeling energized and ready to deal with whatever it is you're dealing with. So one of the exercises that you might do at some point is, if you don't have a place like this, and again, it's not necessarily a place, but if you don't have a refuge, think about making one for yourself, because we all need them. And particularly if we're all at home trying to run businesses and look after families and so on, it's really important to have a place where you can take refuge for a little while. So it might be sitting under a tree, or whatever it is, and just thinking about, well, if you had a place, what might that look like? So moving on here now, again, I'm looking at our mental resilience. So these are the ones marked in yellow. And I'm not going to really have the time to go through every single one of them, but I will mention a few of them. And the first one I've mentioned here is managing our self-talk. So I don't know about you, but I work on my own. And one of the biggest, I suppose, self-limiters is sometimes the self-critic, the person who tells you that whatever you're doing is not good enough, or it's nobody's going to want it anyway, or that you're no good at this, or whatever it is. We all have that critic who pops up probably at the very worst moment and says something like that in your ear, which can totally derail you. And certainly it's really important to, first of all, be aware of it, that this is not necessarily true or real, but also to manage it and to challenge it and to say, look, I'm not listening to you at the moment. I'm not going to take that criticism on board. I'm going to plow on and so on. But the main thing is to be aware of, what are you saying to yourself about yourself? And quite often I meet people who would never say the things they say to themselves, would never say them to their friend or their colleague or somebody they know or care about, and yet they would say these things to themselves. So it's really important to manage that self-talk. The other area is feeling out of control, and we looked at that earlier, feeling that you don't have any control over the situation. And the thing is, you will always have control over something. So the something might be you. You can control how you think about the situation, how you talk about it, how you deal with it. but there is something that you can control. So when you look at COVID-19, for example, we didn't have any control over the virus. We didn't have any control over the fact that all the businesses were shut down, that we had to stay within 2 kilometers, that we had to all stay at home and work from home, and that the kids were off school. We didn't have any control over any of that. But what we could control was the environment in our homes, our self-talk and our thoughts around this, and how we were going to manage things, our ability to be positive, for example, and to just say, look, I'm going to be optimistic here, and so on. So there are always elements that you can control. Focus is another area that causes a lot of stress, and it's because our attention is split. So us ladies, we thought we were very superior because we could multitask. We say, oh, women are great multitaskers, men can't do that. Well, it turns out that we're not doing it either. So it's called split attention, and it means that we're not focusing on anything. We're literally focusing on this and this and this and this in very, very, very quick succession. And what that does, it fills your mind with a lot of busy stuff, so that if you have problems jump up in the middle of it, your mind is split. And the thing about that is that it takes us, I think, 11 minutes to refocus after we've been interrupted. And we are interrupted something like every 8 minutes. So think about all the time that we waste splitting our attention and trying to refocus after our attention has been distracted. And we have a lot of distractions going on, you know, with social media and families and somebody walking in behind you while you're on a call and so on and so forth. So it's quite difficult, and we waste a lot of time through that. Taking action, if you're a procrastinator, you need to just do something. Take the first step. Set expectations that are realistic, both for yourself and for your business. Because if you don't, you will ultimately stress yourself out trying to reach something that perhaps wasn't a realistic expectation in the first place. And resolving conflict. Again, conflict is something that causes a huge amount of stress. And not resolving it or not addressing it leaves it hanging out there, so that it's always something that is there causing that background stress, and we should really try and handle it as best we can. So one of the ideas here is around controlling the controllables. So asking yourself in this situation, what can I control? And mostly you can control yourself. And there might be other things you can, but you can always control yourself. How you think about things, what you do about things, and so on. What can I influence? So if you're in a situation that you can't actually do anything, but you might be able to influence somebody else, then think about what those things might be. And then there are things that you cannot control or influence, and you must accept them. And I always put in brackets, for now, because it doesn't always mean that you will never be able to control this or influence. It just means right now you're just going to have to accept it and deal with what you can control. And quite often, if you're in a situation that is stressful and really, really difficult, this is quite helpful to actually sit down and draw on a piece of paper and write down, what can I control? And often when you do that, you actually just let go of the things you can't control rather than trying to hold on to them. And sometimes that can help. The other area I wanted to share with you, and these are just little tools, is around your focus. So we have a lot of things that we are focusing on, and I think this is called Eisenhowers Matrix. So this was used by Eisenhower in terms of taking his to-do list. Now I have quite a big to-do list, and I do sit down every week on a Sunday and I put things into these kinds of boxes. And it's really making sure that I am focusing on the things I should be focusing on. So urgent and important, obviously, is something that has to be dealt with and must be dealt with. And I will often put a date and a time against those to make sure they get done. Not important and urgent is usually something that somebody else wants. And again, I will try and handle those and try and put some dates and times against them. Things that are important, but I can put on the longer finger, like my VAT return, which tends to go on a very long finger sometimes, but it goes in there. So these are the things that I need to get done, and I schedule them maybe for later in the week or later in the month, depending on when they're due. But the interesting thing is, if you were to really take a look at your own to-do list and you really mapped for a week what you spend your time on, what you may find is that you spend more time here than you do anywhere else. And that's usually in the inbox. It's usually on Facebook, Instagram, all of those places, the news. And one of the reasons we spend so much time here is usually it's easy. So it doesn't really require us to do too much. And we have, of course, a tendency to veer towards the things that are easy to do. And we do those first. And then we find ourselves under pressure for these other things that really do need to get done in various levels. But we've spent a huge amount of time here. So if you're somebody that switches on or goes into Facebook to look at an article and an hour later you look up and you're still on something, then that's where this comes in. So it's really important to make sure that you're not overindulging in the not important, not urgent things, that you are focusing your time where it needs to be, so you're getting the best bang for buck. Another thing that I do is I often, if I have a piece of work, so for example, setting up a webinar like this and putting together slides and all of that, is I set a timer on my phone for 25 minutes and I put in my earbuds and I have some white noise on it. And I just 100% am in that zone for 25 minutes. And then I take a break. But I get more done in that 25 minutes than sometimes I can get done for a whole morning because my focus is complete and I don't have the distractions. So again, if you have things that you need to get done, it's called deep work. If you have deep work that you need to get done, maybe that's the way that you could think, or it might be useful for you to think about doing it. But if you do have deep work and it's up here in the urgent and important, then it needs to be scheduled and it needs to have a time and date against it. So moving on now to our emotional resilience. There are again a number of steps, and again I won't have time to go through them all, but just to maybe refer to a few of them and give you maybe a few tips around it. So our emotional resilience is a funny one because it comes really from our, I suppose, our caveman days, if you want, for want of a better description. It's really our most basic of reactions. So when you feel threatened, when you feel upset, when you feel under attack, or by, not literally under attack, but, if somebody says something to you or they cut you up in the traffic, for example, we revert very, very quickly like that, very, very quickly into an emotional response. And I'm sure you've heard of it, this idea of fight, flight, or freeze. So when our caveman came out of the cave and was, confronted with the saber-toothed tiger, the choices were run like the devil and hope he doesn't catch you, fight, stand there with my club and have a go at him, or, stand here like a tree and hope that he doesn't notice me. And so that fight, flight, or freeze, those reactions are still there. Those very old reactions are still there. And why are they still there? Because they have helped us to survive as the human race. And they still do today. However, it's not the saber-toothed tiger we're up against now. It's many, many other things that evoke the same kind of emotional response. So that email that you get that makes you, become a keyboard warrior, or that word that somebody says that makes the hairs stand up in your head, or that person with that voice that makes you, angry before they've even said anything, or whatever it is. So we all have those kinds of reactions. And one of the most important things is to become aware of the reaction as it happens. And that's not easy. So it takes a lot of practice, and sometimes it's around reflection. So if you've ever reacted to something and you've had the sense, I wish I hadn't said that, I wish I hadn't done that, I wish I hadn't written that, or I wish I had said something. I wish I had said something more intelligent than that. I wish I had reacted. I wish I had stepped in, whatever. Usually when you have a situation that's followed by that sense of regret, that is when you have this very quick reaction, a very emotional reaction. So you've reacted and then you're like, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't done that. And so that emotional reaction, to be aware of it in the moment takes a lot of practice. But when you reflect back on something, that's the time when you can see, oh yeah, okay, here's what it was about that thing or that person or that comment, and here's what I could have done better. And so when you do that more and more, you become aware of your patterns and the things that trigger you. And that gives you an opportunity then to react in a different way. So becoming self-aware around those emotional triggers, which cause often a lot of upset and a lot of angst and a lot of worry, it helps you to be more intelligent, emotionally intelligent around how you react and what those patterns are. The other one I'm going to mention here is managing fear. So future events appearing real. So if you're somebody who worries, this is normally what you're doing. So there's something coming up and you start, what if? So I'm coming on to this webinar today and I'm thinking, what if they don't like me? What if they don't understand what I'm saying? What if nobody turns up? What if they all switch off? What if, what if, what if, what if? And you could be somebody who would sit up all night worrying about that, and it hasn't even happened. But your body and your brain don't know that it hasn't happened. And so when you're worrying about this, your body starts to release cortisol and adrenaline, which are the two stress hormones. And so you're already stressed about something that hasn't actually happened and possibly won't. So the amount of energy and time and emotional upheaval that it takes out of you to be worrying about something that hasn't actually happened and possibly won't, is something that is important to manage just in terms of your own energy, because while you're in that place, you're not in a position to deal with adversity. So I often say to my children, 90% of what you worry about never happens. And it's true. We worry about everything and anything if we allow ourselves to go into that space. So a particular story that resonated quite a lot with me was from this book here. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Option B, and it was written by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. And it was about, so Sheryl Sandberg is the COO of Facebook, and she wrote that book called Lean In, and this was her second book. And she was in her 40s when her husband had an aneurysm in the gym, and he literally just dropped dead there and then, and she had two small children. And that's what the book is about: facing adversity, building resilience, and finding joy. And it's a little bit around grief. But one of the stories she tells in it is where she's talking to her co-author Adam and about all of this and how terrible it is, and she's in the depths of this horrendous grief and this horrendous situation. And Adam says to her, well, you know, it could have been worse. And she looks at him and she says, what are you talking about? How could it be worse? And he said, well, your husband could have had that aneurysm while he was driving the kids to school. And I suppose the message there is that often if we imagine the worst, what's the worst that can happen? Then we can deal with the worst. And when the worst doesn't happen, and hopefully it doesn't happen, then you don't never have to deal with it, but you have the capacity to deal with it. You know what the worst possibly is. And sometimes imagining the worst and saying, okay, if that happens, this is what I'm going to do, allows you then to let go of that fear of the worst happening. But it's also a way of putting things in perspective. So, okay, things are bad now, but they could be worse. And that allows us to have that sense of gratitude maybe for what we have, but also helps us to let go of these what if situations. Optimism is what I mentioned earlier, and that's really just the ability to say, okay, it's not good now. It's really not. But we can learn something here and we can emerge, and feeling strong about knowing that there will be something and we will be able to adapt and we will be able to deal with it. And that sense of optimism can be grown and can be developed if you allow yourself to think about what it is you're saying. So thinking about this self-awareness, so think about what are the messages, but also thinking about the self-talk. What am I saying to myself about this situation? Am I saying this is a car crash, this is a catastrophe, this is a nightmare? Or am I saying, yeah, this is not easy, but you know what? I think we will find a way out. I know we'll find a way out. And that's what being optimistic is about. All of us will learn and grow professionally and personally. We've all learned to learned something new in terms of coming on these webinars. We've learned, some of us, to that new word, pivot our businesses, but the ability to do all of that is wonderful. The ability to be able to grow and develop and learn new skills and do new things. A lot of us have become a lot better on our social media, and learned how to operate, Instagram and so on. So we've learned new things as a result of this. And, again, if it's Christmas or this time next year when we are finally say we're out of it, think back and look at all of the things that you have learned, both about yourself, about your family, about your ability to cope. And the last one there is courage. And courage is, again, it's like a muscle. So all of these things can be learned and developed. And it's like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. But you can build up your capacity to be courageous and to take the first step and to step out there outside of that comfort zone where all the learning and all the growth and all the excitement and adventure and new stuff is. Or you can stay in your little cocoon and not step back outside again and not grow and not develop and not be, I suppose, as courageous as you could be. And so to keep learning and to keep growing and to step outside the comfort zone requires courage. And sometimes it's a pool of resource, and if you use it, you will get better and better at using it. So there are some of the emotional ways that you can become more emotionally resilient. So one of the things, I don't know if any of you follow the work of Byron Katie, but you can certainly look up her website, and she has this idea around challenging our self-talk and challenging our fears. And sometimes we tell ourselves something. We tell ourselves that this is the truth about us. So I'm no good at that. I'm no good at maths, or I'm no good at whatever it is. And she says to ask yourself these 4 questions. So ask, is it true? And the chances are, if you're in a bad state of mind at the time, you'll probably say, yes, of course it's true. I am no good at social media. How can I absolutely know that it's true? And these are the 2 ones for me. How do I react when I think that thought? So how do I react when I tell myself, I'm no good at this? And what would I be if I didn't think that thought, or I didn't believe that fear, or I didn't live that imagined event that never happens? Who would I be without that? So it's a little bit like that question, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? It's to try and open the doors of options. What options do I have in this situation? One of the things about failure, I suppose, is that this idea that when we are in a state of crisis, what happens in our brains is that our viewpoint narrows, and all we can see is the problem. And it just gets narrower and narrower and narrower until all we can see is that. And we can't see any solutions, and we can't see any ways out. We can just see this problem. And this was brought out, there's a book called Black Box Thinking, and that's where I came across this idea. But I noticed it in that film, where Tom Hanks is the pilot and he lands the plane on the Hudson River. And he asks this question before he goes to do what he's going to do. And he says, if anybody else has any ideas out there, now is the time. And so this has come from studies that show that when we are in a state of crisis, our viewpoint narrows. And so that question has been designed in the aeronautics industry to open up the possibilities. Has somebody else got any ideas here? Because my vision has narrowed and I need somebody else to step in here and say, did you think about this? And so we can also do that. We do sometimes get stuck on the problem, and we get stuck being stuck. So how do we open up those doors and say, okay, what else is possible here? And the last area I'm going to mention here is our spiritual resilience. And again, as I mentioned, this isn't about religion, though of course religion can be part of it. But it's the ability to tap into ourselves, our greater selves, our higher selves, our stronger selves, our more courageous, adventurous self. And one of the practices, and you will have seen this and a lot of you will know it, is practicing gratitude. And I suppose I'm an accountant by trade, and I like to have the research and I like to have validated knowledge. And so what I have spent a little bit of time looking at is the science behind this. So when we practice gratitude, it actually rewires our brain to put things into perspective and to make, I suppose, things that are happening around us not seem like the only thing. So often in these situations, we can be grateful that our families are not ill, or that we have a back garden, or whatever it is that you feel grateful for. And that helps you to feel a little bit stronger about the situation that you're in. The other practice that I haven't mentioned there is helping others. So when you help other people, it also helps you to be more resilient, because it takes the focus off you and yourself and your problems and puts that focus onto somebody else. And again, the research shows that when we help other people, it generates those feel-good hormones, the dopamine and serotonin, and it also makes us then feel good about ourselves. So in helping others, it has a kind of a double whammy in that you're helping somebody else, but you're also helping yourself. The other items there are your beliefs and your values, and this gives you a system on which you can lean. So when you're very clear about your beliefs and your values about yourself or about your business, about your product, about what you bring to the world, and that helps, it helps decision making, because you're then very clear as to whether this aligns with your beliefs and your values or whether it isn't in alignment. But it also gives you a sense of confidence. So I often talk about this kind of spiritual resilience like the dinosaur's tail. So the dinosaur, if you think about a T-Rex, he's got this huge big tail that's behind him. And, you know, our beliefs and our values are not necessarily something that we swish around all over the place and talk about all the time, but they're there behind us along with our life experience. And when we feel a little off balance, we can always lean back on the dinosaur's tail of our experience, our values, and our beliefs, and help to balance ourselves again and feel strong. And when you come from that place, of course, you have much more resources to be able to deal with the critical and the difficult things that are ahead of you. Mindfulness, of course, is another one of those areas, focusing on the breath, focusing on being in the moment rather than you're letting the mind run ahead to the next thing and the next thing. Or, of course, often we're in the past, going back over that argument or that situation or that thing that happened to us, you know, when we were young. So staying in the moment also helps us to be clear and to get that clarity on what's important to us. Finding the humor is an interesting one, and having fun. Again, that helps to release all those feel good hormones. And I suppose in the early weeks where we were all you know, locked down, you know, we had a slew of these WhatsApp groups with videos and memes and whatever, all designed to make us laugh about the situation or to, you know, make us have a little bit of fun. And that's a little bit like the gallows humor that we often have, where we're in a, you know, a really hard situation, but we find something to laugh about. And so again, sometimes, you know, if we didn't take it all so seriously, what would it look like? Can sometimes help us to just get over a difficult moment or a difficult patch. And the last one there is love, of course, and it's really about not just romantic love, but all the relationships in your life, having positive relationships in your life, feeling connected, reaching out to other people if you're feeling stuck, you know, that you don't have to manage things on your own. And I suppose that idea of, you know, back in our cave person days, again, we sat around the campfire, and the worst thing that could happen to you is that you would be expelled from the tribe. Because if you were put away from the campfire, if you were put out there, not connected to the tribe, you would surely die. And so it's really important for all of us in these difficult moments to stay connected to ourselves. What's important for me now? What are my values? What are my beliefs around this? But also to stay connected to each other. And that's why this community is so important for all of you, is to make sure that you're all connected to each other, that there are supports and resources provided by Emer and Mary here today, and also by each other, to be able to support each other and to be able to help each other. And you're all experiencing similar but different things. How can you reach out, or who can you reach out to, and who can help you? in the situation that you're in. So this sense of being connected. So the idea around all of these elements is really that we come from a place of purpose and a place of passion. So purpose being what you do for others. So it might be your trade, your profession, what it is you make and so on, but also what you do for yourself. So what and how do you look after yourself, and how do you make sure that you're always connecting your passion and your purpose to everything you do? And when you come from that place, you feel grounded and you feel strong and you feel courageous and resilient. And suppose that's really what we're talking about. So taking action on one or two of these elements and embedding them into your life. So you might decide, I'll work on getting better sleep, which is what I've done recently. And the impact that that's had on so many other things in my life has been huge. Or it might be, focusing on something, focusing on an element of my business, or setting expectations for my business. If people are working from home and they feel, I want to get back out there, to do it in a way that you have realistic expectations that you can actually achieve. You might decide, I'm going to practice mindfulness a little bit more and be calmer and be more in touch, and be able to control my emotions a little bit more, and so on. So my challenge to you today is to pick something, pick one of these elements, and think about how you can integrate some or all of them into your life to help you to be more resilient, not just now, but when you meet the next difficult thing in your life.
Barbara, thank you so much for that. That was really uplifting for all of us this afternoon. And it was taking a deeper and different tack than we have been on up to this. We've been looking at practical tools and things that we need to look at, such as product development and pricing it and social media, etc. Now, I opened up on the 25th of March, and hopefully nobody remembers that, but on that day, I was saying that how agile and depth of confidence that makers have, and in that way, they are resilient. And one thing that always struck me was the resilience that craft and design people have in a situation of, say, they're launching a new product in a bricks and mortar retail outlet. I'll take an example, say the Kilkenny shop, right? And they have to stand there in front of everyone. And another example would be, say, high-end work, where they have to show all of their work at an exhibition opening, and it's open to all the media and criticism. And I wonder, I mean, they all dig deep and they all have great agility, but would you have any pointers for dealing with building resilience to outside criticism? If someone were to say to a maker, I'm just taking a random example, this hasn't been directly said to me, but something along the lines of, I'm putting the jigsaw together. Oh, sure, Jane, don't even bother developing new product, because why don't you just close up your business during this period? Would you have hints and ways in which people can build their resilience in that scenario?
Yeah, well, I suppose, Emer, one of the things that's really important is that we don't get into this thing of comparing ourselves to other people. So I'm a rower, and we have this phrase, eyes in your own boat. So don't be looking around at where everybody else is and whether you're winning or losing or where you are in comparison to everybody else. Just row your own race. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in the criticism of other people and what other people think you should do. But at the end of the day, having confidence in your product and the value that you're bringing with your product, and being clear about the value that you're bringing with your product. Why do you produce what you produce, and what's the value to people? So you might say to me, well, if it's a piece of jewelry or something, to bring joy to somebody, to mark an occasion, to, all the reasons why somebody would make with love and time a piece of jewelry. And so I would always say to people, be confident in your product and why you're doing it. And it comes back to your values. And whatever anybody else says, that's their opinion and they're entitled to it, but it should never affect the value that you feel you have and you bring. And I think if you can keep going back to that, and sometimes we lose sight of it. You know, I'm in the coaching world, and sometimes I think, oh, sure, nobody's going to care about this stuff. Sure, who cares about coaching? Nobody can afford it at the moment. Sure, they don't even have jobs. You know, and so it's coming back to, well, look, I have a value, and I know that I can help people, and I do help people. And so I have to come back to that and say, look, I'm going to keep forging ahead, and I'm going to do what I feel I can do to bring that value out into the world. And yes, of course, you're going to have people, there's always somebody who will criticize. But, you know, if you have that strength, if you can lean back, as I said, on that experience and those values and those beliefs and say, well, I know this is behind me and I know I'm strong enough to keep going.
Okay, and what about the idea of maybe putting pictures of your previous successes into your mind at that juncture? You know, like say you
Yeah.
previously had a very successful jewelry exhibition where you received an awful lot of commissions thereafter. And are those things important? Does it help to have?
Yes, it does, Emer, it does. Yeah. So I have an idea called the virtual trophy room.
Okay,
So we mightn't actually all get trophies for everything we deserve trophies for. But, you know, if there are things, real achievements, and they don't have to be, you know, you don't have to have won a medal for it, but things that were achievements for you. So you just mentioned somebody standing in front of people at a display and having to, you know, that might be a nightmare for somebody. But if they manage to do that, that's some achievement. So writing down those things in your diary or your journal or having a file on your computer, and when you feel that moment of weakness or you feel that moment of I'm not good enough or whatever it is you're feeling, to look at it and say, well, hang on a minute, look at all the things I've done. You know, I have achieved these things, and I did stand in front of those people, and I did make that presentation, and I did sell those many commissions. And so that gives you that sense of confidence that you've done it before, you can do it again.
yes, and actually all of our client members should have that confidence because their work is really wonderful and a lot of them
Mm,
have previous examples that they can cite. So if they're
yes.
in that situation where they're launching a new product and there is a criticism, I suppose dig deep and remember. And I don't know, maybe plant a few advocates in the room. What do you think of that strategy? Is that
Yeah, I think that's a good strategy too. I mean, you sound like you've done this before. I
good?
think I think it depends. It depends on your level of confidence. I mean, some people are very confident and nothing will knock them, you know. But some of us are our confidence is a little more fragile, and it can take just one person to say something, and it doesn't have to be true, by the way. Just because someone said it doesn't make it true, by the way, you know. So asking, you know, is that person right? You know, I don't really believe they are. But definitely having your advocates, having your champions around you is really important, whether they're in the room or whether it's just somebody you can ring up and say, talk me down here, you know, tell me how good I am. You absolutely need those people in your corner.
Good. And that's why you're saying as well, you know, that this group of
Mm,
designer crafts makers and the Design Crafts Council can help in that way
yes,
through
yes.
networking and
Yeah,
supporting. And
yeah.
I mean, I just think that your help has been invaluable. Everything coming up in front of me is thank you and so helpful. And I think with that, we'll look forward to your next episode, where we'll be looking at confidence. So you're going to give us lots of pointers on how to build confidence.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Listen, Barbara, thank you so much, and thank you
Thanks,
everybody
Emer.
else for being with us this afternoon.
It's
Thank you.
lovely to talk to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.